So Olga made a request. We normally take about two or three questions at a time. Olga was more comfortable with taking one at a time, but what we'll do is we'll take one question, and then if people have related questions to that, if they can put their hands up. So that, I think, a concern was that the questions are often very disparate and hard for the speaker to tackle. So opening this up now, if you could raise your hands, and then we could do the first round. Okay, Ankit? Start with Ankit and let's see how it goes.
Hi, thank you. Um, I'm coming from a position that someone actually that likes the concrete boxes that Indian cities have, and also is quite critical of the Singaporean heritage policy. Both in the sense of, I think there are other motivations that are behind the fact that heritage protection becomes a thing, right? So, for example, in Singapore, the centers of Kampong Glam and Chinatown are also the centers of gentrification. They're also the centers of high-end boutiques and new bars and new restaurants, and that's the motivation between protecting these spaces. While if you go to the peripheries of Singapore, a lot of the times the modernist blocks are being broken down. Similarly, in London, the idea of the London vernacular is used as a basis to break down brutalist modernist housing that's normally for social housing purposes. So, and perhaps another corollary for that in the Indian context is that an infrastructure in the village, an important one, is the well. The well is a heritage infrastructure, but it's also linked with perhaps problematic social notions of either lower caste or Muslim exclusion from the use of that infrastructure. So when protecting heritage as a basis of either new basis of universal service delivery or sustainable infrastructure, don't these perhaps more problematic notions of power and either real estate value production, creation of a tourist spectacle, or even exclusion of groups that are not part of that identity per se come into it? If that question makes sense. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much for a wonderful presentation. I have traveled through Italy and it's really, really beautiful. Hats off to them maintaining their country like that. And unfortunately, traveling through India, going out of Delhi and traveling through India, through UP, anywhere at all in North India, South India, I haven't really been, so it is a disaster. So, have you sort of, approached the people, the planners, the politicians, because this needs political will actually, for sort of solving some of these problems of truly, truly ugly towns where there's no waste management. I recently went to a place called Jhalewar, which, like Chanderi, it's a beautiful place, but the town itself has wonderful historical buildings, but they're kind of sort of, just in ruins. Some of them are still preserved, but not good enough. The ex-Maharaja there runs a hotel. So people like that maybe can be involved in this restoration so of course it needs political will and, maybe intact people like you can sort of, push the authorities to do whatever. And there are lots of places like that in Rajasthan which are sort of, falling apart. All this heritage, Singapore, they can also be preserved. We can make a lot of money from tourism in all these places, not just Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, which you talked about. So, and I think, where people live, whether it's villages, cities, or towns, you just need to, it needs to be good, where people are living, spending their whole lives, their children, their children after that. We just need to have something good, but it's all very ugly. And, I think one basic thing is greenery. Just greenery everywhere, a basic thing of just growing trees and making it green. I mean, Bombay is an example of total ugliness, and there's so many rich people over there.
Sure.
The richest people of India live in Bombay, but they've done nothing at all. Anyway, yeah. So, that's what I asked her. I said, have you approached the politicians, the authorities to do something about India?
Yes. Okay. You want to take, connected questions about gentrification. So I want to know what is your exact definition of heritage, and especially how you define what is tangible heritage and what is intangible heritage. Olga, why don't you take?
Okay, so yes, starting with the point of gentrification. So interesting. We just had a short conversation with Mukta on it before. The thing is that yes, certainly, basically, what is happening in gentrification is that the area becomes better, uplifts itself altogether. Now, like the services are better, it's better looking, it's better connected, and then as a result, the land value is rising, property value is rising, and then there is a certain change. Now, I wouldn't be necessarily negative towards this because. Do we want overall a kind of upliftment of the city? And yes, certainly when you improve certain areas, the land value will rise. And that is also what owners want. For example, I was just talking with some officials in Barcelona last month in Kuala Lumpur, and they were saying, yes, definitely we've done a lot of things in the past few decades, and certain areas have really uplifted themselves. Now what happens is that there are owners of the flats which suddenly now see their flat has increased in value 2, 3, 5 times. So it becomes their choice. Certain of them, yes, they move out of the area and they start renting it out. Someone prefers to sell it and buy a nice house on, in a small town on the sea border. So, but then again, that's a kind of a discussion. Like you have now new assets. What are you going to do with them? But it's also your choice to stay in this area and benefit from it. But maybe you make a different economic choice. But then, in my view, I'm not saying that everything is good about gentrification. I think in the case of Asia, it's a little different because then already people face a large amount of vulnerability. So one needs to think of how to integrate them. In fact, we haven't shared today, but we also looked at the case of Malaysia, where the cities of Malacca and Penang have faced this kind of, gentrification, even not only gentrification, you can call it, but people basically were moving out of historic areas just because of the invasion of tourists, and they were not finding their kind of, connection with the city that they used to have before. And yes, it is an issue. And no, I don't have an answer. In fact, I now am part of an international group on kind of brainstorming on sustainable tourism because I want to understand this better. But what I see is that in Asian cities, in developing countries, tourism is a booster at the initial stage, and improvement of the area's quality of life is also a booster. So, would you immediately kind of rule it out just for the sake of these people not moving out? I don't think priority wise that would be. Now we need to think about these people, like what. Maybe building more affordable houses around, and then it's a case by case scenario. You can't really generalize because you need to see what these people are doing, where are the economic activities, how are they connected to the area. So so these things are there. Another thing that I want to mention when you talk about concrete boxes and so on. One thing that I mean, at least this is my view. Honestly, heritage areas, especially in Asian cities now, these are so small. It's like less than 1% of the total area. So why suddenly we become so particular about demolishing these poor, few buildings that are left, and we cannot just build elsewhere? So certainly yes, in some areas, for example, not in India for sure, but for example, in Malaysia, yes, heritage areas acquired high land value, so you would want a high rise instead of a heritage building. But then again, it's a question of policymakers to think ahead. Not today that that specific person is going to make a profit, but what is going to be the competitive advantage of your city in the coming 20 to 30 years. And for that, you need that vision. So this is where I think Singapore is a good example because they have a vision. And then again, they haven't focused only on heritage. There are a number of things that were done. In fact, I visited like completely remote areas in, like towards the border with Malaysia, and they do have these kind of 8, 9 stories houses which are pretty old stock, like compared to like the new stock they're building in the center, which is like 80s, 90s, which recently they have renovated. And believe me, it still doesn't look like a concrete box. In Singapore, the amazing thing is that everywhere there is a sense of the sense, but also the value and the wish for aesthetics. So nothing is left, to. In fact, I looked into the guidelines in construction development in different areas, these are very strict. You have to respect the identity, the purpose of the area. You have to provide pedestrian paths. You have to green. You have to plant trees. You have to provide shelter against rain and heat. So all these provisions, in fact, I mean, when saying this, of course, I'm not claiming in India immediately we can reach that level of policy. But one thing that I've seen, wherever policy has been taken seriously and enforced, it has provided results. So that is something that that needs to be also, I think, thought of in the Indian context. That maybe at least some policies that people connect with need to be put in place. For the definition of heritage. Well, we, as the Head and Dark and even the division, we work more on built heritage. So yes, there is a bit of like, what is the kind of expiration date? Like, even for example, in India, I think at least it needs to be 100 years old. So there is this whole debate of modern heritage, where does it stand? That is there. I think like different countries approach differently. I think in the UK also maybe you have a shorter time span, maybe 50 years or something, if I remember correctly. And then when they're newer buildings, then you increasingly more look into matters at what kind of cultural and social value it has, in terms of what kind of role it played. Maybe it's in Russia, for example, there is Soviet Union architecture that sometimes it's ugly, but then because it does bear certain historical value, then it's considered to be important to preserve it. Then again, case by case, you would look at it. Intangible heritage, I'm less familiar, and yes, it's an interesting question, and I think again that. Certain aspects of your life are there with you. Like, for example, in Little India, in Singapore, I would see people would wear Indian clothes. Some wouldn't wear Indian clothes. But to an extent, I guess you can't impose on people like a traditional way of life, but it has to unfold. If you connect with something that, that has its own place, but we cannot stop people from also experiencing different things and looking at different things. But then the enabling environment should be there. For example, India, while for its built heritage, I really can't praise it in terms of policies, but in intangible heritage, yes, when people visit India versus Southeast Asia, for example, you can definitely have a more immersive experience in terms of food, in terms of clothing, in terms of languages that is still more prominent than what you would see if you visit, like Thai cities or Vietnamese, maybe Khmer cities overall. And just to also to react to your comments, I'm glad that there are people passionate about having a bit of aesthetics in the cities today, because yes, indeed, it's a big issue. So in fact, my kind of take on heritage, built heritage in India, is that even although I think what Intac is doing is essential, you do need to preserve, you need to fight for buildings case by case because protective legislation is not there. But eventually, to unlock the potential of heritage, I believe it's not lying in directly working with heritage primarily. It's lying in all the surrounding kind of access issues, like livability issues, because that's the point that the challenges that we face as international tourists, for example. There are certain areas, certain cities I visited in Europe, like in Slovakia, Slovenia, countries that don't have that much resources to invest into restoring heritage, and it looks a little dilapidated, but still you have a wonderful experience, because still you have a proper pedestrian path, you're walking, there is no car that tries to hit on you, and the streets are clean, and you do connect with this heritage, and you sit in a nice cafe, and eventually, if walls are dilapidating a little bit, that's not spoiling your experience to such an extent to which it would spoil if you have to reach somewhere and you're completely in the dust and solid waste is lying everywhere, and actually you had to fight to even find a transportation mode because you don't have a proper public transportation circuit. So I believe for India to unlock the potential is actually to invest into these infrastructure matters in heritage areas. And what is happening in India is that it seems that the government is reluctant in going into heritage areas. It does invest to a larger extent in non-heritage areas because, heritage areas have a number of issues. If you look at Chandni Chowk, then it's not very clear. The building belongs to someone, but he's not living there. eventually no one is interested actually in the investment. So many such issues are there, which the government feels it's a more sensitive kind of area. But the important thing is that investing the same amount of money into a heritage area versus a non-heritage area would actually bring much more benefits in the heritage area. So that is something that the policymakers would need to see. And now, in terms of your question, yes, I have tried having such kind of talks. To be honest, in Indian cities, it's been challenging because sometimes they don't even understand what you want to say. But that's the whole purpose of Seher and Tak, and we in fact are building a community of people who can kind of spread the word and work in this direction because it's very much needed. But it's difficult.
Do you want to use the microphone to be easier? You can step up and use the microphone.
Yes, I could hear.
But everybody else has to hear you too.
Oh. So could you please specify a little more?
Yeah, I said with respect to your talk and to heritage, how do you compare your experience in Singapore to Taiwan and China with relevance to India and the Indian context?
So relevance to India of Chinese and Taiwanese example, you mean? Or?
That division was very nice and they were doing heritage planning. What about Taiwan and China?
Right. Okay. So Taiwan, I'm less familiar. In China, I've recently been to China and I spoke with a few people just to understand the heritage policy. In China, I guess the situation is a little more difficult because there are heritage activists, and at the same time, it's a kind of a double, which happens on a number of policy issues in China, that there is an image they want to project. So I actually had a few official meetings with city officials who would tell me, yes, we are very serious about heritage, no single building is getting demolished, and in fact, people themselves demand that we preserve heritage. But then when I would talk with international experts on the same city, they would say, oh, actually, demolition is taking place, and it's a completely different scenario. So it's a little difficult to figure out what exactly is the situation in China. I was looking at Beijing as well. There were areas with traditional kind of shop houses dating back to up to the 13th century, which were getting demolished just recently, 6 months. Some of them, they were under threat. So I haven't looked yet into a complete legislation in China, but I believe, again, that would not be one of the major examples I would quote confidently. But I would need to look a little more into that.
Thank you, Olga, for a very interesting talk. But I would think that you are using the examples of Italy, a European country, of Cambodia, of countries in the Far East. Have you visited any country in South Asia? Have you been to southern India, as my colleague was mentioning? I would suggest you pay a visit to Sri Lanka, which is a small island. I spent 3.5 years there. You walk in and you cannot believe that it's a neighbor of India. It's better than a European country. The villages, they look after their heritage in the manner that you are suggesting. So that's one example. Even in southern India, I'm sure Kerala, Tamil Nadu, as the lady said, that apart from northern India, the emphasis on heritage is more important in southern India. So is intact, Seher intact, or whatever your team is, are you, when you give suggestions for India, are you also thinking of visiting or talking to people in southern India, Sri Lanka, not so much the other South Asian countries, but I'm talking about that part.
Yes, thank you for pointing this out. So, in fact, in South Asia, I've only visited Nepal. Somehow it happens that a lot of my work is happening in Southeast Asia. So you do have a point, and in fact I interacted with the UNDP office in Sri Lanka, and they had quite an interesting project of reviving ancient water system in the agricultural setup, but that was working quite well, and there was public demand for this as well. So definitely Sri Lanka would be an interesting example to see. I'm also aware about what you say in South India, which yes, I have visited a number of, pretty much all the states, like major states of South India, and yes, It is a bit of a different, how to say, connection to heritage that people have in there. So as Seher in Tak or in Tak, although as you know, in Tak has chapters all over India, but overall in the headquarters, in our internal discussions, we were saying that South Indian people maybe are not as keen working with the Delhi, headquarters as like more neighboring states would be. So we are considering, in fact, maybe taking one South Indian city as a pilot, along with Chanderi and one or two more cities. Now our kind of first criteria in selecting these pilots is to have support from both state level and local government. And that is not easy to have. So maybe the issue that we face in kind of North India is more kind of an institutional organization awareness, whereas in the south it's more kind of willingness to to jointly work together. But we are a bit cautious about whether we can succeed or not with the implementation on the ground. But yes, it would be interesting. I agree that for us to kind of give a holistic view of what happens in India, we do need to incorporate different sub-regions. But yet, one thing still I want to say, which comes from my personal experience, wherever I travel in India, and that is east, west, south, and north, I still see all the new constructions as the same concrete box. So that I want to understand how we reached there, because in fact, India is such a hub of diversity, cultural diversity, and now we are not exploring this in the built architecture at all. And I feel this will deserve India a lot, because in fact I haven't mentioned about the tourism statistics, but India is placed quite low. It's about 8 million tourists, foreign visits a year, versus China is like 10 times more than this. And even Venice alone has more tourists than India altogether. So even Singapore, yes. So exactly. That is so. Two issues I see there. One is because access to heritage. Actually, all the annex heritage, of course, heritage of India is uncomparable to the heritage of Singapore. I mean, it's just, no point to say this. But the access is not provided. Hence, people are not benefiting from it. And the second thing, the rate at which we are going, one is demolition, and two is completely faceless new architecture. Where this is going to lead India in the next decades, unless we change things, I'm not very confident.
Completely agree. Just one add to this. I would think that Indians would prefer to listen more carefully. The examples you are giving are closer.
Yes, that's noted. Yes.
Not the white man's country.
Yes, the
Far
only yes.
East Asia,
Right.
which they connect with China. Let us come closer.
Good point. Good point. We will definitely take this. Yes.
But I mean,
Yes. So yes, absolutely. Yes.
Because Clark
Yes.
Way, I went, to me, I would never have associated it with heritage.
Yes. So yes, Marie-Hélène, you make a very good point, and I think I tried to emphasize upon it, but maybe I wasn't very clear. So see, heritage of Singapore as such is not impressive.
Right.
Compared to what you see in Europe, what you see in India, even etc. But the way they have valorized it, the way in which other areas of the city play a role, altogether, it becomes an important component. Right. See, if there was absolutely, it's how it's presented, and it's the fact that it's there. Because if you have only contemporary infrastructure, something is missing. If you have heritage areas and then your contemporary architecture is ugly, then again something is missing. If you don't have any green areas, again. So for them, whatever they had, they preserved, and they did demolish before they took consciousness. But altogether, they created an experience, and that works tremendously well. So that's what I want to convey. Not that anyone can replicate Singapore's example, certainly not. But on the ground, once you take these measures, it actually looks wonderful. We need also to acknowledge this. Yes. 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 In fact, when I visited the first Kochi, I didn't believe I was in India. That is true.
I have a question. I have no answer to your, yeah? No, I was, no, I think it's very interesting. You, normally I don't need ice cream all the time, so. No, about this idea, this concrete box story of India, I wonder in the kind of elements you've given, if you want to understand, if we were trying to, let's say, understand which leverage you have to play, you mentioned policy and strong enforcement of policy, right, which in India is something shaky. You mentioned institution, but you did not at all talk about economic incentives, economic factors, which are, I would say, not from outside, because even tourism, the way you've mentioned, you've talked about tourism, is mostly, okay, we will make this place a touristic place, right? Which is very different from people having incentives to either maintain the structure, either build differently, and that relates to the kind of materials which is available in the market, which is, I don't know much about this, but I remember reading somewhere, I mean, I need to look at this literature, but, glass is cheaper very often, or cement is very cheap. I mean, there's a lot of economic factors that play into that. So how did you see these factors play in the other case studies you've looked at? Because this is different from institution and policy.
Yes. So interesting. I mean, very, very valid point that you made. So I kind of deliberately chose to look into policies and institutions because we actually have a dedicated work on looking into heritage designs, heritage techniques, heritage built materials, and Anushka is primarily responsible for this. So in fact, we are now starting a cooperation with Starlight University in the UK with people who work on what they call appropriate technology. So we just started this work. That's why I didn't want to yet share these elements. But what we have looked at so far is, yes, as you say, cement and glass. This is all cheaper. But when you look into endogenous energy, into how much energy consumption these materials take in terms of transporting them, in terms of creating them, this is actually it creates a much bigger negative impact on our environment and also contributes to climate change versus locally built materials. So that is something we still need more kind of evidence and data. That's a very important component that we specifically called Anushka, because she has this kind of experience to look at, because yes, this needs to be understood better. We spoke with Ashok Lal recently on this as well, that how can we, in fact, the dilemma of Asian cities is that they grow fast, you do need housing, you don't have time to build each building, for several years or whatever. But we want to explore whether there are ways in which we cannot completely go into the standardized pouring cement and yet make it economically viable. But we need a bit more time, and hopefully we'll share it when we are there.
Just to add on Mari's line, there are some other problems of conservation, mainly with the old materials, availability of older materials and craftsmanship. In Kolkata, we have seen that some of the older craftsmanship almost vanished. There was in a typical Bengali architectural style with lime. That was in Bengali, this is term is used, ponkher kaj. There is nobody available to do the restoration and other types of work. So some of the craftsmanship got vanished all in the way. So and the newer generation, they say that break it. But these are the pieces of art. So this is also a point I made with some architecture, conservationist architectures. Why don't you revive this type of art so that old buildings can be revived? But they say those are too costly and so and so. If the materials can be revived, the craftsmanship is difficult to revive. So that is another point should make. And the second one is about the process which goes on in India. It is basically the role of the urban local body. They have a heritage committee. They make the list, and there are grades of heritage and others. But there is no incentive or anything offered to the private individuals to maintain the heritage buildings. So when they find it that they cannot maintain it, they fall in the so-called these promoters, developers, whatever you call them. So in Calcutta recently there was a case, there was a motivation that the old heritage building of a hotel was just torn down by a novo-rich promoter who managed the heritage committee to take it out of grade 1 list to grade 3. And nobody knew. He said that I did nothing illegal. But there is something different between illegal and what should be preserved and what not should be preserved. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. You have taken a wide range of cities and their spectrum of activities. So the parameters of tourism and heritage are very vast, and they do not fall within the category, and they have to be trained regularly, whereas in other European countries they are regularly trained about the heritage and the culture, whereas in the modern world, do you think that it is possible for us to make the heritage cities to its best of splendor? And do you feel that the tourism is also changing so fast that the nuance of the tourism are also changing? So how do you rate your studies in comparison to the modern today, rather than looking back, 1950 to 70s, when things were changing and you were trying to build up to attract people? And the parameters of tourism are very weak in India, and if we discuss the threadbare, we find that we stand nowhere. But still, we are drawing crowds like Agra and other northern states are doing extremely well in spirituality and in yoga and other activities. But that doesn't fall within the scope of giving some incentive to the Indians. So how do you rate them? Thank you.
Okay, right. So maybe I'll start with your question and then I quickly comment on. Yes, just let's look at the Agra case quickly. So this is something that we also went to see in the frame of Seher and Tak with an NGO called Cure, because they do a number of kind of environment-related rainwater harvesting activities in neighboring areas of Taj Mahal. So when we went to see the urban planner of Agra, what he told us, he said our main issue in terms of tourism is that tourists don't stay overnight. They do come, but then they leave early morning in Delhi. They see 2-3 major Taj Mahal, the Red Fort, and maybe one more building, and then they leave and they spend the night in Jaipur. So then he was really wondering what should we do, and so I think his best strategy was to maybe put up a casino, and then he was hoping that people actually would be attracted to to stay overnight. So now what we tried to convey. We talked about the Taj Ganj area, which is the area adjacent to Taj Mahal, which is actually, even I thought maybe presenting a few slides, but then was not having time. It's a beautiful area with a lot of vernacular architecture, which still has a very good feel, low rise. It's directly connected to Taj Mahal. And this area is absolutely off the tourism map. It's only if you really want to know, and you look into the website of this Cure institution, which has some heritage walks, and that you'll come to find out. What we have suggested to Agra, and in fact they were in the phase of developing the smart city proposal. So we said, why don't you focus on reviving neighboring areas? Because the reason why tourists don't stay is because Agra is not a pleasant place to stay. Of course, you will go to see the World Heritage sites such as Taj Mahal, that's why you go there. But apart from that, there is a huge drop between what you see in terms of heritage and then all the rest where the facilities are, really need to be enhanced. So, and it was very interesting because there was a complete misunderstanding. He couldn't even understand what we mean by bringing this holistic experience to tourists, where they would interact with local population, walk in small streets, maybe, eat in some small eateries, maybe having some homestays. Instead, his vision was that we need to put all the smart city money into enhancing the major tourist hubs. So what this is going to do is going to create an even bigger difference. And then again, are tourists going to stay overnight? They've seen Taj Mahal. Why would they? There is no other place they could experience. So this issue is there, that we are not providing holistic experience. That's why for me Singapore is a very kind of prominent case. And then yes, you're right. Tourism is changing, but yet at the same time, people travel. Yes.
You know, quadrangle, Jaipur, Delhi, and Agra. It's a triangle which makes. But still, we are not able to draw the tourists to even this smaller portion of an area. So this is what.
Yes.
Not only Agra.
Yes, Jaipur is doing a bit better though, because people would kind of the general perception is that you can kind of more play around in Jaipur than what you can do in Agra, and that also is due to the attitude of the Rajasthan government, which does invest into this more kind of specifically and holistically in a way as well. So and then maybe also to comment on the lady's remark. Yes, I mean this is a big issue that we are facing with heritage, because legislation is so weak, and even what you have, you can still overpass it. So at that rate, heritage losses are definitely taking place now. In terms of what you say, in terms of capacity and craftsmanship, so. So yes, I was also thinking like where to start on this, and I mean the usual kind of way would be to think both top down and bottom up approach. So top down would be yes, if there is consciousness, and creating certain policies which would enable, as Marie-Hélène was mentioning, providing more incentives for restoration. Yes, and to private owners to an extent, so that they are also interested in this. But in India, why I see the case is difficult is because usually in places where access is better, then suddenly the private heritage owners benefit, because the only thing you need to do is revamp your own property to attract someone. In India, it's not enough to revamp your property, because then people also will experience all the rest. So there, the role of the government is critical, and the private sector will not renovate the whole surrounding area, improve transportation, improve solid waste management, and so on. We've been in touch with the Nimrana Foundation and looked at, they shared with us the experience of the PPP in Tejara Fort, which they wanted to revive in Rajasthan. And the government had also to bring its own bit, which was providing proper access, providing electricity. And they went on for a toss of 10 years, where it was extremely challenging, actually, for them to get the government to do what they had committed to in the MOU. The conditions were constantly changing. So again, altogether, in fact, even in all my work, I realized institutions is what makes things work or not work, because everything can be good on paper, but then if the government is not committed to what they have committed to initially, they constantly re-question. Then now I know that Nimrana Foundation is not up for any PPP in the near future, and that also sends bad signals to other private owners. So until the situation is such, it's not easy. And the bottom up, I think cities like Kolkata, in fact, that's my favorite city in India, where people still care, that can change things to a large extent. If there is demand, then supply will to an extent appear. So that is what we also lack in terms of heritage in general. And again, South India, Calcutta, there are pockets that have a different attitude, but still I feel insufficient, maybe like on the global level. But yes, of course, any such movement is very precious. Yeah. Yes, of course.
Hi, I'm Anusha. I'm from part of Saher team. To add on the conversation, I would say that in India we do talk on heritage, but it's in a very isolated manner. Firstly, secondly, when we talk of precincts, we have monuments, but they are so much isolated. We can't talk of a precinct because you can't just conserve a tomb and just you put it in isolation. So there's a need to understand that we have urban areas. So when we talk for Singapore, yes, Singapore has provided incentives. They have provided planning incentives, tax incentives. They have provided economic incentives. They have provided awards to the community, those who are actually preserving their set of buildings. So there is a need to understand that till the time any person is not getting advantage or economic benefit, people will not contribute into it. So to contribute, it has to be a two-way set. Yes, political things, norms, legalization, authorities are part of it. But you just can't ignore the community and you just can't put something which is out of box. So Aga Khan, Nizamuddin Basti is one of those examples where they have tried to initiate the green space, the economy, the city, the community, the culture, the tangible, intangible. It's all part of it. So you need to understand the fabric and the precinct and the city goes hand in hand. It's a machine which goes on and on. It's not, you just can't put something and fix a day, because it's a continuous procedure which is goes on. So in order to understand in India, especially when we talk for north or south, yes, south is popular. Yes, Madurai has provided their smart city, has the heritage smart city plan. But to understand south city, they are more centric towards temple. So their heritage conservation is more religious also. But when you talk for North India, what you talk for? Gurdwaras, temples, hardly any kind of gesture is there for religious thing. So to understand, you just can't do anything in a night. And we can't compare North and South because of there is a notion and there's a different of mindset as well.
Just maybe to add on this important point, Anusha has brought the community involvement. I think there is a big disconnect in India in what I see between the kind of intellectual heritage consciousness community, which is there in TAC and other stakeholders. I think we've mapped pretty much all of them, and they're part of kind of Saharan TAC consultation group, and the actual people who do live in these heritage areas. And to be honest, I don't know yet how to bridge that. And in fact, you were mentioning Aga Khan Foundation. I think these are the ones who do the best work in this. Now, an important element for them to do this work in average, not only in India. In fact, I listened to a number of their kind of presentations on their work in other countries. In average, they take 10 years for implementation. Now, if you look at the Hriday mission on the 12 heritage cities in India, so the first step of this was to map what needs to be done in the city, and for that, the mission allocated 3 months and 2 lakhs of money. So in that versus 10 years, of course, you cannot really understand what is the community aspiration, how to involve it. And in India, it's extremely complex because these communities are not unified communities. Like there are religious divides, caste divides, social divides. So it does take years to actually do something. And I'm yet, to kind of understand what is the best way of approaching. Involving the community, but yet you do need to show some outcomes in the coming years, because otherwise the governments, the political mandate is 5 years, so something you need to show. So we do need to kind of be aware of that. So yeah, that's an ongoing kind of thinking.
I'm from Korea, and I have 2 aspects. One is as a tourist point of view. Second is a business point of view. Suppose your heritage, the maintaining or restructuring is mainly for tourist value. As a foreign point of view, we do not expect India is like Singapore. The tourists, enjoy the chaos here, which they do not have. It's a kind of stress. They like stress. Unexpected, train, disconnected, unscheduled. It's like adventure. Partly. I'm serious. And when they come India, they prepare by themselves.
True.
Yep. True. And India, you talk about your limitation to maintain, but you are very proud of your heritage. You have too many heritages than any other countries. How you can maintain? Impossible. And the economic, the value point of view, simply you cannot compare China. China GNP per capita is almost $8,500. India, $2,000. You cannot compare. You cannot compare. My point of view as a tourist is that rather than restructuring your heritage, tourists, they know, people coming here through the website and information, you have plenty of heritages. Everybody know about. They like the journey to reach that place. So my simple, the suggestion is to not spend too much money to reconstruct your heritage. Just minimum maintenance only. That's enough. And when you become more wealthy, then you can change as you like Singapore.
Yes. Now, I think you have a very good point. Yes, people who visit India, they like this kind of spontaneous. But there is a limit to anything. Sure, some people they fall in love with India and they like to kind of have this experience, but yes. But then for the majority of people, they would visit either they want this kind of experience, but then if they just want to have good time and relax in during their like 2 weeks of holidays in a year, they will not go to India. They will go to Southeast Asia.
Maharaja tour separate. We have a premium tour also possible.
Yes.
Backpack also possible.
Yes.
So you don't care about that. They know everything.
Yes.
If they enjoy the Maharaja tour, they know how to do.
Yes. But the interesting thing is that the tourism statistics are still quite low for India, international tourism. They do have quite an active national tourism as well, but I mean that fact is also there. While I do acknowledge that this experience is appreciated by some.
I'm doing my own business here, and recently I invited the Korean architect who developed permeable road block, pedestrian block, to introduce in the market. And you may know about the porous block,
Yes.
which absorb the water.
Yes.
But this is already proven in Korea, and accidentally Seoul, Beijing, Delhi, we are all suffering the pollution at the same time. It doesn't matter whether developed country or developed country. It's an equal situation now. Because Korea also very serious about the dust pollution,
Yes.
because they are internally tested and extended now.
Yes.
In India, I invite him to here to introduce, and this is a very ironic situation. I met the responsible minister also with the senior engineers, and I expect some pilot project. And to do that, the local senior engineer introduced local manufacturer to propose the pilot project. But you see the block is very heavy. We cannot import even pilot project. Local manufacturing is mandatory. But through calculation, nobody interested in, because they don't know the project in future and how much the investment against what the return. Even the government part cannot help. And one typical example, if you go to the car market, everybody know about car market. Car market, there are the back lane, very legacy area, more than 10 years, 20 years. Yep. You talk about tourists. How many tourists, foreigners there? This is very unpopular area. But the female with the high heel, they couldn't walk properly in the back lane. Everybody that area, I think, very the rich people, but nobody concerned about very small pavement backside.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
That's a small point. Even here from outside, recently I just traveled the Dubai. Of course, very fresh air there. But one thing very different here with Dubai is that very easy to walking outside. In India, Delhi, very difficult walking on block. Very, very difficult. And the smell. These are small things.
But you said some people come specifically for that, so.
People talking about heritage. If you make some minimum condition,
Yes.
then tourists feel more comfortable here.
Exactly, that's the whole point. Absolutely.
So
Yes.
if anybody here to help me you talk about the state or local government cooperation, and I would very appreciate if you give me some guide how to.
Oh.
It's my dream to pave the car market back lane. It's a pilot program.
Can I interject here a little bit? Sort of taking on Anusha's point, this exactly what he spelled out, that there is a certain charm in the chaos, but if we invert it from the quote-unquote community point of view, and if it's also about improving the quality of life of these neighborhoods, cities, whatever, and if we invert the entire perspective, then I suspect that some cities would take up heritage as an agenda and others wouldn't. So, I mean, I think in my view, the whole priority has to be A, quality of life, B, what is it that the perception of this improvement of quality of life is? It may be paved roads and it may not be paved roads because they may not be wearing high heels. And they may not want people with high heels traipsing around on their, whatever. What I'm trying to say is that the community, the aspirations of every city, neighborhood, whatever would be very different. So when we have an idea where we are saying that there is a top-down view, even as professionals, we are giving a top-down view most of the time. So who are we doing this for? And that's the fundamental question. So when you're saying valorizing value, what kind of valorizing and for whom is a fundamental question. If in Rajasthan there has been this enormous success in terms of converting old heritage monuments into hotels, it's because a whole fraternity was disenfranchised and didn't have access to jobs and employment, and that was their way of leveraging their heritage to do it. And the knowledge was not passed through some institutional mechanism, but from mouth to mouth, from royal family to royal family, etc., etc. So, I'm just trying to contrast that even professionals are coming with very outlandish sort of ideas on the table as compared to what should actually emerge from below. And how do we then recognize and facilitate that as intact, as Seher intact, as whoever we are?
Yes. So see, here it's very interesting what you say, and I'll comment in a bit of a nuanced way because yes, sure, one needs to understand what people need and in what kind of environment they want to live. Now, when it comes to build heritage, I think one needs to be a little more cautious than that because sometimes you think that you want something, but whether you really want that or not is another question. Look, for example, in India now there is a big stigma, like this kacha pakka, and obviously pakka is the concrete box and kacha is the vernacular architecture. So now where does this come from? So you're influenced by various number of perceptions, by TV, by what you see as a progression in your social status. For example, if you come to Chanderi, so people want this concrete box, but do they really think that their electricity bills are going to increase if they want to mitigate heat, because this is not going to act as the vernacular kind of local materials in terms of mitigating the weather effects. So that included the example of Italy, not that it's a model for India, but just because at that time people also didn't value heritage so much. But I think there is a role, and I agree, it's a very delicate kind of place because you don't want to be like, I know what you need and this is what I'm telling you. But when it comes to build heritage, which again, I think we have so little of it left on the world scale that preserving it seriously wouldn't harm, and that's why in the 70s UNESCO came with this outstanding universal value, because we first need to learn how to create interesting new, and to be honest, Singapore to me so far is the only example I've been really stricken by contemporary architecture. In fact, one of my colleagues, Italian architects, he's kind of propagating this idea that we have stopped to build the heritage of the future. In a sense, what do we leave as a legacy of unique kind of architectural examples? Because now everything is standardized. So these issues, I would not disregard them. And yes, I agree, it needs to be brainstormed and needs to be thought of how to approach. But I wouldn't have this kind of one stand position, okay, you want to demolish all your heritage and build concrete boxes, fine, we'll help you with that. No, I wouldn't go in that direction, to be clear.
My name is Jitendra. Thank you for your talk. Among the developing countries, which one has the highest highest percentage of tourism revenue from tourism sector as a percentage of their GDP?
I wouldn't know exactly. Anusha, have you come across? You have looked a bit into tourism statistics. I think China is quite high on the.
Nominal terms at about $78 to $80 trillion. And if you see the tourism statistics, they measure direct tourism revenues as typically, accommodation, entertainment, flights, and then they measure indirect impact. So globally, the tourism industry, direct is about 2.3%, China, which you say, the direct tourism is about 2.6, and if you look at the impact, indirect impact, then globally the figure is about $7 trillion, which is give or take 8-9%, and this is what it has been all through. And as far as India is concerned, you would be surprised. Last year, the contribution of tourism to GDP was 9.6%. Okay. The main difference between Indian tourism GDP numbers and global tourism numbers is that somewhere between 85, somewhere around that, maybe 88% is domestic tourism. And this is primarily because, it's a large country, so most large countries would have a relatively high proportion of this thing. But 9.6 to 10% is considered very high, so Singapore is amongst the higher ones. India is also amongst the higher ones. I would not know specifically if Egypt in its normal times had higher revenues, but I mean that's something we could check easily. I would not imagine that it would be very high today.
By the way, to introduce Ranjit, he's been our mentor in economics of heritage, so that's a topic in which we will be looking for an expert soon to kind of finalize it in a chapter, but Ranjit has been very helpful throughout.
Yeah, I actually have a question for both of you, but I'd like to ask you the question that I happen to be working in Chanderi a couple of years, and I've also been working in one of these cities which is right 2.5-3 hours from Chanderi, which is Gwalior, if you have heard of. Chanderi I still feel is in a better place because still there you have 70% of vernacular heritage, but you don't have the same kind of disadvantage of the development that's happening around in other cities like Gwalior, which have become the counter magnet for Delhi and other areas. So recently, and now it has come under the smart city proposal. So one of the major chunks of Gwalior has been taken up by Smart City under the area-based development, and they are trying to revive it in a fashion which probably will not actually save too much. So you have at least 60% of vernacular heritage which is left there. You have a main chowk which has 6-7 iconic buildings left. You have a palace structure, and I happened to speak to all the stakeholders there. So I spoke to the municipal commissioner, I spoke to the SDM, I spoke to the CEO of Smart City, and everybody wants to make a museum out of all the buildings, and they want to make everything which generates economy, everything which is flashy, everything which is swanky. Nobody wants to look at the people who are actually on the streets. They want to pedestrianize the whole chalk, and how do you pedestrianize it? We'll relocate them somewhere. They don't understand that you have buildings, you have infrastructure that you can actually house those people there. My question only comes up when, how do you stop? 2 years already gone from that smart city proposal. The DPRs are all gone. So I happen to speak to them that I can help you as an expert on heritage, and you don't have to pay me. I'll just work with you. I can just tell you that these people, there's this kind of heritage that we can probably use. There's a lot of adaptive reuse that we can do. But of course, people, there has to be a way of connecting to people that of course one person can't do. And these agencies like smart cities and they have a very different agenda, and you don't know how you would stop them. I don't know how to stop them. And I don't know, maybe you have a solution to tell me. I'm just asking because I've been telling them there's one of these buildings in Tak is restoring. It's called the Victoria Market. It was burned down a few years ago, and now they're restoring it. So that building used to be a pool market for the last 200 years, for whatever I've known. And I've been trying to tell that everybody who's sitting on the chalk is basically used to work in that building. So if you kind of put those people on the inside the building, your problem will be solved. No traffic congestion, nothing, you don't have to do anything. No, but they want to make a geological museum out of that building. So the only thing is that we have solutions right there, but we have such, Hriday schemes and smart city schemes, and we don't know what to do. I don't know how do we intervene with such kind of things. And my second question to you is that Aga Khan has done something. They've conserved Humayun's tomb and Nizamuddin Basti, and they've done all sorts of social infrastructure, physical infrastructure. They had that money and time.
Yes, exactly.
Not everybody has that money and time. The kind of research that they have put in, the kind of funds they've got, not everybody had it at their disposal. So that's where neighborhood we are talking about. So there are areas like Khajuraho, Chanderi, Gwalior, and we are facing this. And it's like a roller coaster. It's like snowball. I don't know how we do that. I mean, would you like to comment on it?
The question is to me or to Anusha?
So both, so Aga Khan was just like a comment I was giving, but the question about the smart cities and the
Yes.
projects and proposals.
Okay, so let me give my view, and Anusha, if she wants to add something to this. So, what I came, because I mean, just before we started this, I was telling to Mukta, I find it very challenging to work in Indian cities, and in fact, if I do have projects in Southeast Asian cities, I feel more comfortable because things happen better on the ground. I fully agree with you. We do have the technical solutions. We have enough expertise. If we don't have, there is enough international assistance, NGOs, to kind of find out what is best to be done. The real issue lies into, someone even being willing to look at these solutions, and then second, of course, to implement. So the way where I have reached, I feel probably we need to develop more patience. If you look into the smart cities mission, I did a small assignment for UNDP on assessing the smart cities mission in India as part of a larger Asia Pacific assessment they were doing. So what I realized in smart cities mission is that there are some clearly positive points. For example, for the first time, citizen engagement is actually part of the rating of the smart city proposal. It's about 16%. So now the way it's been done, we talked to some NGOs, in particular in Pune. It can be debated because, for example, for the area-based development, you're supposed to consult citizens on, which kind of area you're going to choose. But then in Pune, they told us the way the questions were formulated were of this kind. Which area would you prefer to live in Pune? Which area would you base your business in Pune? So obviously people will give you the best area, but it doesn't mean that's the area they want for development, right? So a lot of improvements need to be there. But I feel on one side we need to acknowledge, for example, yes, Hriday has happened. Yes, it was imperfect. And as I said, this inception time was way too short. Inception funding was way too short to produce tangible results. Yet it happened, and they're planning to extend it to more cities now. So that's a positive outcome. Same with the smart cities mission. Climate resilience was lacking, which is an important component. Again, cultural component. In Singapore, it's all over identity, culture, etc. At least some of it wouldn't hurt in India. That was not there. But then there are learnings also. In the next phase of smart cities mission, I don't know, to be honest, what they're planning. But I believe maybe some incremental kind of learning will happen. But what you say is that, yes, I constantly feel like this, that why, this makes so much sense, why don't we just do it? But yeah, I believe that we kind of need to accept it will not happen immediately. In the process, we'll lose a lot of heritage assets, and the process will lose a lot of opportunities for people. And it's really case by case. You can't generalize unless there is a national policy which is strongly enforced, which in the Indian case is difficult. You need local leaders that would take things forward.
I wasn't really questioning the rationale and the site selection for the ABD. My only question is, let me put it that way: how do you plan to preserve the vernacular heritage in Chanderi? I mean, is there a way? Because similar situations, you have unique typologies, architectural typologies of housing there in Gwalior. But so I'm just asking, is there a model that you
what we are planning for Chanderi, like the way I see the process in which it can work, maybe. When we went to talk with the municipal authorities, they were not that thrilled. They were nice, and as I come as kind of international expert, there is still a little more attention that much of gain is there. So, I mean, we talked very nicely, and they said, yes, certainly very interesting, and yes, we want a tourism boost. But then very clearly I could sense, because at the same time that INTAC restoration project was going on, INTAC is actually preparing a dossier for heritage nomination for vernacular architecture. At the same time, INTAC in fact was not interacting with engineers and municipalities so far. And I did that because that's in the scope of SEHER, looking into sustainable development and heritage. So two important things I learned immediately. One was that they were planning to repave certain streets from stone pavement to CC pavement. So that, for the heritage, file that INTAC was planning to build was a very bad kind of situation. Same thing with the housing for all. There were about 500 houses that they wanted, as they said, put under the scheme, which very clearly meant demolish and build the concrete box. So these, as INTAC, we brought this to the attention of the state level government, and I think the pavement, to my knowledge, has stopped. They managed to influence. For the housing for all, I don't know yet. So what we are planning now, because the kind of support at the municipal level is there, but very mild. We look into different champions at the national and state level, and we'll try to act through that. And if we see there is no support, then we won't do Chanderi, because there are so many reports you must know since you worked. There is no point we produce one more report, but there is still hope. As it started on, as I said, on the request of UNESCO, so we kind of inherited. And then we realized there's huge potential. So we do hope. We go hopeful, but we are prepared also that maybe eventually it will not be supported. And that's the risk you take with pretty much any Indian city when you want to, yeah. I mean, I don't know, maybe CPR can share a little bit their insights. I mean, for me, it is challenging. I'm saying honestly that I would wish things, take off in a better manner.
Can I add? Yeah. So my notion is towards your situation is, firstly, we need community awareness where our community don't have those. Secondly, there is a need to implement policies. Third, incentives need to be core part of it. And then how we are actually thinking of these places in next 10 years. Because till the time we don't have long-term plans, we just can't put down on paper, because in India, which I feel working in such kind of department, I feel like, yes, it is too much on papers, but less on the vision when it comes on the basics. And like, for example, Hriday has taken initiative, and when we talk for Amritsar, there is definitely in India has so much notion of the Western world that when I went to Amritsar, the entire precinct is beautifully redeveloped, trust me. But the immediate precinct areas are so dilapidated and dead that what my colleague Olga was saying, that this is what Singapore has actually enhanced, the entry points, so that the area need to get connected. There need to be a synchronization. It should not be like this is redeveloped area, this is the old area, this is the new area. Because when we talk for Delhi, we have Mehroli as example. You have one UNESCO World Site, Qutub Minar. You have 30 plus monuments in Mehroli. Then you have Archaeological Park, Central South Ridge. It was the first capital of Delhi when you talk for 7 cities. But still we don't have a heritage precinct. Still Delhi is not part of World Heritage Cities. And Ahmedabad got nominated into it. Why? Because of the reason we talk for only decorating a certain area.
Yeah,
but why
more
not entire
beautifying.
area?
Yeah.
Because if we talk for Qutub Minar has a hotel next to their precinct for the people, those who come to visit Qutub Minar. So those are coming to visit Qutub Minar with such enthu. Why can't they visit the entire precinct? Those have at least 30 plus monuments there.
Yeah.
People aren't aware of such things. And experience. You need to, exactly, you need to understand the fabric. Like me and Mukta were having a talk, and she said that she went with some troop of Chinese people, and they could immediate understand, oh, it should be a city actually. So this kind of notion, immediate a person who's not even staying in India could understand, then why can't we? Because we are not talking holistically. It has to be holistic notion. Just planning department can't do anything, just government can't do anything, not politicians can't do anything. Till the time the vision is not holistic, what exactly Olga was saying, for Singapore, that's the need of time. That's the need for India. Not north, south, but the entire nation can grow such way.
Yeah, no, I actually completely agree with you, and I believe that all of what you're saying, that all of what you're saying, that we need to do community awareness. You need to provide some, let's say, TDRs, to the people who are the incentives and whatnot, having development controls in these areas. My concern was only that we know all the solutions. So all of us know if it's a neighborhood, if it's Mehroli, not just built heritage, natural heritage, cultural landscape site, whatnot. Okay, the works. And then it's a different debate why why Delhi is not the World Heritage. Lot of things we can talk about. My only question is that I wanted to know how now we have these smart city proposals which are on the run. And if you look at their PPTs, they look like those. So there's a building which is a historic building. Now they suddenly put a picture of a European building and they say, so that's how the PPT is, which I actually saw. That's the official PPT. That's how they're implementing. And these urban design consultants and heritage consultants are working on it very happily. and they look like one of those European buildings with certain lights and like a shopping. One of those buildings was converted into a shopping arcade. So I just want to know that is there a way that we can sort of, because they're done, they have their DPRs ready. They keep saying their DPRs are ready.
To answer your question, I have only one answer. Just tell me this: why Delhi NDMC area is part of smart city and why not any other part?
Again, exactly.
Why you need it?
I don't think we can solve the smart cities problem right now. Exactly. So anyway, I know Mariellen wants to say something, and if anybody has a really, really urgent comment, that will follow, and then I think we can take this outside the formal discussion.
I'm sorry, because I think it's very interesting that your example of the market that you are saying, Gwalior, is very interesting, because I think it goes back to me to the question on gentrification very much, which is that I think it seems that to me the crux of the talk and maybe of further work is, does heritage include people or not? In some sense you say yes, but in many ways you say no in what you kind of plan. And so the market is typically, there's a fear of poor people actually, like if they would destroy these places. I think in Meroli, I'm not even sure one should intervene in many ways. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm not an architect neither. But I mean, yeah, exactly. And it's not that it's crumbling down or it's becoming, I mean, so I think that's really a very important questions. And I guess to local councillors, I mean, when you work on slums, it's a very different subject, but it's the same question, to try to explain that they are not people that just need to be thrown away or relocated. And I think there's a kind of very strong note here that one needs to look at more seriously. And just on a note, I mean, the questions around gentrification, I'm sorry to say, but in Europe, it's not that everybody agrees with the kind of heritage as a historical, again, process. And it was also, as you said, I think it's Second World War, I mean, a lot of Europe, and there's a lot of reasons why heritage became such a prominent story. But right now, the question of sustainable tourism is really,
yes, absolutely.
Barcelona maybe have done too many things, but even Barcelonian authorities today says that we cannot manage anymore. Yes. We have too many tourists. It's not sustainable. People are starting to resist. People in French cities are starting to say that we don't want anymore. We can't shop. We can't, even if we live in the center of Paris, we can't buy anything. We can't shop. I mean, there's a lot of questions that are actually beyond thinking of what can be done, need to be really thought of. I think it's a great research agenda, actually. So, yeah, exactly.
Quite strongly about it.
Yes. But so I think the link with gentrification need to not be dismissed and be really understood and unpacked. Yes.
One of the things which hasn't come up, and I think it's important when you're looking at smart city structures, whichever way, is fundamentally the decision makers in your city do not understand the city's heritage because they're not of the city or from the city. So the municipal commissioner is only there for a very short time. The municipal commissioner of Chanderi has no link to Chanderi. And consequently, it's hard for that person to understand what that process is. You've been basing a lot of your story about tourism, but as he said, a lot of the Indian tourism market is a domestic tourism market. And domestic tourists do not value heritage in the same way because they live in heritage. So it isn't, when somebody is not, every person is coming from a place which has its own structure, and therefore a 300-year-old house, my house I live in 300 years old. How do I matter, right? So that's the demand side story that becomes a problem in that particular story, which is why the foreign tourist story becomes a bit more interesting and important. But on a sidelight, I wouldn't be so despondent about smart cities because from what I can see, the SPVs and the local governments can't get along. And so nothing is, even if the DPRs are being put together, they may not be implemented. So you might still have time to intervene and engage with trying to fix it, right? But I think when you look at most of your other experiences, one of the things I would like you to bring out is the locality of the decision-making process. and whether the decision makers are embedded in the cultural context. And my sense, from the limited sense I have, is both in Hanoi, in Siem Reap, in Singapore, and in Italy, that embeddedness is there, which is not there here. And therefore, it's difficult for you to make that transition that you're trying to make in that particular process.
Very good point.
So that's one of the things that I'd like to sort of catch as you go forward.
So maybe Mukta, just to thank everyone. It's been wonderful to have all your inputs. I think that was one of the longest CPR talks, which feels very nice. It means that we're all very concerned about the topic. Please join our Facebook page. We have left a few brochures of Seher and Tak because we do keep posting some of the key findings, and we very much also would like to keep hearing from you on our work.
Thank you, Olga. Thank you for coming in. Thank you.